Welcome, everyone, to the Scale Lab, brought to you by TechLeap, where we're trying to deconstruct the path of some of Dutch's great companies and how they're breaking through. I'm Joe Wilson, and I'm here with my co-host, really the sugar to my salt, Constantijn van Oranje. Constantijn, we're into technology, and the guest we have today is very special in that space.
Definitely is. It's Derek Roos of Mendix, and I would like to dive right in and ask you the question. What was the biggest decision you made in your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, that's actually an easy one. Without a doubt, it's selling the company. After 15 years, giving birth to a baby and seeing it grow up and then making the decision to sell it was definitely the hardest moment.
So in the analogy of giving birth, what was selling the company for you?
Yeah, I don't know if there's
sending it to
How does that metaphor carry over? I want to hear this one.
Maybe we shouldn't take it that far, but I guess I wasn't certainly thinking about selling, when we received an offer to acquire the company. So I wasn't there mentally, and I also felt, we were just getting started. So I had to really get used to the idea of it. But if you force my hand, it's probably, sending off your kid to school or, probably leaving the house or something like that.
Yes.
But maybe a bigger decision because
it's
no longer your kid, right? That's the thing you're selling.
So it's selling your children is basically the analogy that we're talking about. It's like selling your kids. Yeah.
That's why it's a hard decision, right? You're
I
not supposed
to
do that.
So it wouldn't be as difficult.
Yeah. Well, maybe as you started with birth, maybe we go back to where it all started. What triggered your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, so I can't say I grew up thinking of myself as an entrepreneur or wanting to start a company. So it was really when I went to business school in Rotterdam and I joined this startup company while I was in college, just as a side gig, where we run into the issue that we ended up solving with Mendix, which was the appdev problem that most people recognize these days. But where I said, okay, this is such a hard problem to solve, and it was my personal problem that I said, okay, I just have to solve this. And so I think, and
you were an engineer. You were a coder?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I was more on the product side and the business side, working with customers every day, and we just saw the problem. It was a very personal frustration at the time, and we just said, okay, let's go solve this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's take a moment and deconstruct that, because I know that the audience who listens to this, different people, they may not realize exactly what you mean when you say that appdev problem. It might not be as obvious to them. So can you just describe that in a little bit so people know what it was you were going after?
Yeah. So if you think about application development, right, and in the traditional way, it's, I think, one of the hardest challenges. And if you imagine you need an app and you're working with a customer or user that needs this, has this need, but doesn't know exactly how to define or how to tell you what they need. You end up in this multi-month or often multi-year process where everything takes forever. The costs, go through the roof. And at the end of the day, you're left with, something that isn't quite what the user needed. And the developers being frustrated because they spend all this time building something that ultimately doesn't satisfy your needs. So it's a hard problem. It's costly. It takes forever, and it's super technical, right? Because as a business person, you're really left to the technical specialist to create something that you need. So that was the problem. So the idea of Mendix is really to solve that in two ways. One, dramatically speed up the process of building applications. So what used to take months, we wanted to do in weeks or days or less, but not just by making developers go faster, but by putting the power and the tools in the hands of the end user. And that was a disruptive idea that, I guess we were the first to try this.
There's a I forget exactly the quote, Edison or somebody talks about how all technology strives to be a utility, and ultimately means things that we thought were once crazy complicated, somehow, become easy over time. Today we turn on a light switch but one day, people thought it was ghosts or demons, right? So this is a bit of what you're saying, like desktop publishing or anything else. You guys basically wanted to take what was considered to be the most complicated thing in technology and suddenly put it in the hands of someone else, as a less necessarily trained user, maybe.
Yeah, and it's a great analogy because to us it was such a logical thing to do. So, hey, why are we spending all this time and money on something that I should be able to do? Because I know the process. I probably understand the user if I sit next to him, and if I show him in a matter of minutes or hours what he's telling me it should be, it's probably much easier to have a conversation. So we realized that the challenge is really a technical challenge. It's a communication challenge. It's a human challenge. So for us, solving it was just such a logical thing to do. The problem was that we were the only ones that saw that. So we ended up starting this company with this big idea, but at the same time, no competition, no market category, no reference points.
The low-code movement was years away.
100%. And everybody thought, it was a nice story, but, too good to be true. We were described as the holy grail that doesn't exist.
Because the problem still exists, right? I mean, if I ask people what is the sole function that is most difficult to find, it's the product owner. So the link between the technology and the actual product. But how do you find out you were actually the only one? I mean, where do you go? Because we come to that. You went to the US pretty fast. I mean, there must be. You're not alone in the world. This problem must have been puzzling people for a long time. So you come on this idea. Do you then think I must be crazy that I'm the only one who saw this? And did that empower you to pursue this, or did you? I mean, it could also imagine you were worried about it and say maybe I'm not on the right path here.
Well, we knew we were trying to solve a big problem, so we never questioned the need. Mm-hmm. Which to me is where it all starts.
You validated that as well.
Well, it was our own problem,
right?
Yeah,
okay.
And at this other company, we had dozens of customers that were frustrated with the fact that it took us 12 months to deliver something. Mm-hmm. So we knew the problem was there. But the fact that there were no real competitors or big success stories in this market should have probably been a telltale sign that there was a problem.
But they thought they had answers, right? They thought they had these large platforms, these large open source .NET. All the stuff is out there. This complicated, coding languages from C++, so everything. So they thought they had solutions, and you're saying, you have a solution for a small group. We want a solution for a larger group.
Yeah, there were no solutions that enabled the masses that essentially democratized application development for the world. That didn't exist. AppDev was still very much a developer-focused topic. And to us, we realized that, hey, if the world is getting more and more digital, the need for software will explode. And we can't depend on those few people that know how to write code. So we said this problem is big today, and it will only get worse. So we have to change the paradigm. We can't just make the developers go faster because there's simply not enough developers in the world unless we turn everybody into a developer. That was the vision. But the problem was, and yes, there were a few other companies that were trying to do this, but a big problem was that most of those companies were trying to sell to developers, which still to this day, but certainly then, is not a viable business model. So that was a big problem. It wasn't just the fact that there were no good success stories. It was also the going thought to build a tool and then sell it to developers wasn't going to scale.
So what was your go-to-market strategy? I mean, you had to create a new client, basically.
Yeah, well, first of all, we decided to give the tools away for free, right? So that was the first step. And monetize the end user, because that's ultimately where the value
What's the end user in that when you say
of the application?
Okay,
right?
so whoever's going to buy the app, you're going to take a piece of that or something.
Exactly, and this is pretty normal today, but then we were the only one.
How did you figure that out? How did you figure out that you actually had to give it for free?
Well, I think we tried everything, and then I mean that's I think the solution to most challenges for us. It was never, I mean, in hindsight, we like to say, we had this big vision and,
we're all brilliant.
Aha moment. But, the reality is, you try everything until something works, right? And then you go from there. And same with the business model, the same with the technology, the same with who we should sell to and who we should avoid and all these little things. We tried everything. And, the fact that there was no market category, right? Somebody we could point at, say, we're like these guys, but better, faster, cheaper. That didn't help, right? So because if you're the only one, you're kind of seen as the crazy person, right? When there's someone else, well, maybe you're not so crazy. You're unique, but and then you grow from there. But also from a VC standpoint or an investor standpoint, most investors, they want to see other companies that were kind of like you and did some big exit.
That's some sort of risk evaluation, right?
Yeah. And so the fact that we couldn't point to anyone, it was an issue at the time.
In fact, you didn't even raise money for a long time, right?
No, so we, out of, I guess, necessity, we ended up bootstrapping the business for the first period.
Did you do like a service company model for a while, or what? I mean, everybody kind of tries that if they have to, right?
Yeah, but it was. I mean, we always thought of ourselves as a product company, but we're selling. We were helping customers from day one, selling a bit of services to help them, and in the meantime, we were building out the product.
So was the services based on the product you were building?
Exactly.
You're like, look, let me show you how this. Just pay me, and then then you have these marquee customer type things you can
So
point
the
to.
first 50 customers, we actually built the applications for them while we were building out the platform. Then slowly but surely, we could shift some of that work to partners and the customers themselves.
So for anyone listening, if you ever wonder what it feels like to build an airplane while it's flying, I think Derek just gave us the exact example of that.
Yeah, and we did that out of necessity because we didn't have, lots of venture capital. We had basically no startup money. We were students at the time, so we had, I remember I put in. It's a funny story actually. At the time, you needed 21,000 euros to start a business. Right? Which was so there were three of us, me and my two co-founders, and we each chipped in 7K. That became our starting capital. It's a true story. It
must not have been even as a student. 7K is not so easy to come by.
I know, it was a lot of money.
Yeah,
and but the beauty of that, again, in hindsight, was that we were forced to go and find customers quickly on day one. We couldn't say, okay, let's take 6 months and build this prototype and see if we can sell it. No, on day one, we needed a customer. So, we asked friends and family and everybody we knew, and slowly but surely we started to see some traction.
How do you avoid the trap of doing bespoke stuff and becoming a service company or a consultancy, where a lot of startups actually end up being dependent on that revenue stream and not stepping out and actually developing the product?
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a risk. And, for us, it wasn't that hard because we didn't see it as a pivot. We always looked at ourselves as a product company. On day one, we always had a R&D department, even though in the beginning it was one person. That was our R&D. They're not involved in customer projects. That's where we built the product. So it starts there. But then at some point, and this is part of the reason why we raised our Series A few years later. So, okay, we need to change the model. We need to start selling software as a service and reduce our dependency on the cash flow from projects, etc. So that was a deliberate choice to say, let's raise money and
But at the time, you had your product market fit, I assume, and you understood that you had to give away the product for free, and that you had an earnings model that worked. So, and how did you, as you had a new category, you had to educate your investors, how did you convince them to step in, and did that come at a price?
We raised a small seed round, a few $100,000, and that was almost, I think it was in our second or third year. So we had some traction, but we're still early. And so that happened actually pretty easily. So that also tainted me a bit. So, okay, this is easy. When we need more money.
This fundraising stuff.
There's all this money out there, all these investors. So when we needed our Series A, I think we're looking to raise 10 million or so, which was a lot of money at the time. This was in 2011. We still didn't have a category, like a proper
So you had no
software
comparative
category.
analysis.
So we had
thing.
no real
Gartner
competitors,
charts, none of
nobody.
that stuff.
And so in, I think, maybe a 6-month window or so, I ended up pitching to every VC that was willing to pick up the phone and take a meeting. I think I probably pitched maybe 30, 40 VCs at the time, which was brutal because, you get a lot of no's, which doesn't help your ego, but also it's the steepest learning curve I experienced probably in the past. 10,
For
15 years.
each of the founders listening to this podcast, just be aware so that even Derek had to pitch to every single VC out there. And at the time there were only 35, and now you have 100 and something. So if you're at number 100 plus, don't despair. It doesn't mean that you have a bad company. So
Your VC mate is out there somewhere.
Yeah, but so as you were pitching, I assumed you learned a lot. What was your main lesson, and what actually finally made you land the Series A?
Well, we were raising our Series A for 2 reasons. One, we wanted to reduce our dependency on service so we could go all in on a subscription model. And number 2, we wanted to go to the US. So those were the 2 things. So my first step was, let's go raise in the US. So I flew to the US, set up a few meetings, and actually got a term sheet. It was not a very good term sheet. And the issue was, there were several issues. One, we were still not very clear on the story, number 1. Even though we had some proof points, they were all in the Netherlands. And, they don't really resonate in the US. And number 3, most VCs, at least the top ones, weren't investing in Europe. That's completely different now. All the big guys are true. Here. But then, this is 10 years ago. That wasn't as much the case. So now we pitch in the UK, we pitch in the Netherlands and other areas. And if you compare my pitch at the end of that 6 months with the first one, it's day and night. Yeah. We learned so much about how to pitch, what our real value proposition was, or how to explain, who our target customer was. And
so it taught you how to talk about your company, and it taught you probably something about where the key of your strategy was. Was it also dependent on you understanding much better what venture capital wants to hear, and can you explore that a bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's both. So there's a way to, I think, that investors look at, right, pitches and business plans. I mean, they get thousands, so you have to know what they look for. So that's absolutely.
So just be concrete. What was it? What were the things that you learned that they were looking for, and that you need to change, adapt your pitch to?
Yeah. Well, one thing is obviously your value proposition, right? How concrete can you be, right? How concrete can you be in quantifying the value you provide to customers?
This is a numbers thing.
But not like financially, but value, right? So why should a customer buy you out of 50 other things he could spend his money on? And number 2, how big is that market? Because if you're so disruptive and you say you're the only one, are you the crazy person? Or is there this big multi-billion-dollar market that you're going to own, 10 years from now? How do you tell that story? And so that's how, at least my experience, I think, what we learned in that process. But I will say just as important is our own understanding of who we were, right? Because there's a reason something doesn't resonate, right? And you can sit there and think that everybody doesn't get it, or you can look in the mirror and say, maybe I'm doing something wrong, right? So it's validation or lack thereof of, your value proposition, your demo, the way you think about your strategy, your whatever it may be. So it really helped us mature our thinking about what our place in the market should be, and how to organize ourselves for that. So,
did you actually change things to the company through that insight, or was it just the way you
like a strategy shift or something?
So it's think of it as a 6-month strategy exercise where you get to test it. Getting market validation from customers obviously is most important, but most customers don't ask you the tough questions, right? They want to solve a business problem, right? That's what they are interested in. VCs think about the company as a whole and the potential of your company. And so that was a great learning experience and very frustrating, but in hindsight, got us really up-leveled our game in a big way. And one of those investors that we pitched to in the early days of that process actually declined us initially. And then a few months later, they ring me back and say, hey, are you still going? Are you still raising? We changed our mind. And
that's like a unicorn. That's a rare bird thing to find. Someone that would come
I was
back.
surprised because what tipped them, I heard this story later, was that somebody that they trusted in their network said, hey, do you know these Mendix guys? That's the next SAP killer, right? So somehow they trusted
killer. There it is.
that person.
Yeah.
And
That was his final pitch, by the way, to the VCs.
Yeah,
They were like, what do you
that's
do?
not what
We're
I
the
did.
SAP
Yeah.
killer.
Actually, SAP became one of our most important partners later on.
Just to clarify.
I guess I saw the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, nice. They also saw it. So if you look through this hyper educational process that you're going through, and then you're evolving. I mean, I remember all the pitches that we did on my different companies, and I think in the beginning we were green, and by the time we ended it, we were red. But we were, to a certain degree, still on the same product line, but our understanding. And you asked the question in a way, Constantino, like, what did you change for the VC? But I thought your answer was spot on, which is, we had to know what actually mattered and who we were in order to tell a story that people would believe. And so you get through all of this, and on the other side, you take money.
Yeah, and this is especially important when you're early and you don't have a lot of data to tell the story, right? Which is also the challenge with, I guess, Series A, because that's kind of a weird phase where you're not a seed. So it's people expect more than just an idea and a great founder, right? They know, hey, you're in this market for whatever, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, 3 years. Show us some traction. Show us some data. How are you doing? And if that data doesn't tell that story, like in our case, right? We didn't have a lot of competitors. Our business, our P&L didn't look at all like what we're putting in our business plan, right? Which made sense to us, being bootstrapped at all, but to VC, like,
Because you're going for share.
Are you pivoting? What's going on? And so data needs to support the story. Perfect world. If it doesn't, you have to explain yourself, which is never a good thing.
Okay, so you were raising to go to the US. Finally, after half a year, you raised sufficient money to actually go to the US. What was your drive to go to the US? Why do you know? As you said, you were basically taking half a year to redefine what your strategy was. Didn't you ever reconsider the move to the US at that time?
No, it's we knew we had to go to the US on the day we started the company.
The day you started the company.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, let's hear this.
Yeah, we knew. We were ambitious, right? And we knew the problem we were solving was a worldwide problem, and one of the biggest problems in tech, at least as far as we could see. And our ambition was to democratize application development. And if you look at appdev, that's a global market, right? It's a developer-led market. Everybody looks for the best tool, and it's all online. So we knew if we want to change that, we have to be the leader, and that means we have to be the leader in the biggest market in the world, which is the US. So to us, it was logical, right? We never even. Everything we did in those early days led to that point that we felt we were ready to go to the States.
Well, how did you get over the whole, we're going to be a really, really tiny fish in a really, really big ocean type of feeling? Because I think a lot of the people that we talk to on this side who think about it, they get that fear. Oh, yeah, we'll go over there, but how do we ever get above the noise? So how were you guys thinking of that when you made the leap?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess we never thought of it that way. We said, no, we're gonna win, right? And you can't start. I think if you start thinking you're gonna end up second or third, you're never gonna become first, right? So
wait, let's just deconstruct that for a second. So there's a mindset here that says you have to go in it as if you're going to win. And I'm not going to rhyme that. You have to go in it as if you're going to win. If you consider being second or third, you'll make the wrong decisions. Am I translating that right?
Well, I think there's a nuance.
Okay, please.
Because they didn't ask the question right. If you start asking the question and saying, I have to now develop this mindset because otherwise,
okay.
But you just went, right?
It was already there.
So basically, you must have been frustrated in the years before that you were not in the US yet, or not? And that you were wasting time in the Netherlands, or wasn't that an issue?
Well, I mean, we could talk about. I think there's a lot of value to being in the Netherlands and the Dutch market that we can talk about. But compared to U.S. companies, you're definitely behind, right? Because you have to move there or somehow take that step, whereas local companies don't. So that's definitely true. But what you said I think is really key. It's not asking yourself the question is what it's all about. Because the moment you have to ask yourself the question, it's in your mind, right? And I think you can call it, being naive, perhaps, right? It wasn't arrogant. I don't think we said we were better. We just said, no, we're going to do this. And, that was the end of it. It wasn't more complicated than that. And I think if I had known all the challenges and the pain of doing this, I probably wouldn't have started, right? But being kind of naive about it and not worrying about all those things about competitors or what Amazon may do or Microsoft, it doesn't really matter, right? It matters what you do, I think.
And to our listeners, especially Dutch founders, what would you tell them? Did you feel was an advantage in any way that you came, that you were not US, or is it just a disadvantage you have to kind of get over with, and basically you have to run faster and jump higher?
Well, also think that's not relevant because you are here. So thinking about it in terms of advantage of disadvantage doesn't. But
with hindsight, not even thinking about it, if you with hindsight, was there anything that kind of helped you from not being US?
Well, I will say that the Dutch market is a fantastic market to start a company because it's relatively small. It's like I look at it as a lab, right? You can test things. Dutch customers are pretty open to trying new things. It's extremely referenceable across verticals. So you can take a bank, if you're a horizontal technology company, you can take a banking customer and go sell to somebody in logistics or healthcare. I mean, they kind of can relate because they're all big companies, for example, in the same kind of small market. And there's a lot of talent here.
Did you deliberately exploit this when you start realizing actually this is good? I'm now in two countries.
Yeah.
Did you exploit the Netherlands as a laboratory for the US?
Yeah. And even when I moved, we officially opened a headquarters in the US. Well, we always kept another headquarters. So we always positioned this as a dual headquarters. One, we were proud to be Dutch, right? And two, this is where our product team was based, our R&D was based, half of my leadership team was based here and still is today. So we kind of leverage it as much as possible. But if you're started here, I think there's so many benefits to this market that you should tap, especially today. I mean, 10 years ago, there was no real VC community and there was no ecosystem like what you guys are building. I mean, there weren't that many success stories. We have that today. So
I want to touch on something you mentioned a minute ago, which is talent. Like, so we can use the Netherlands, US, but like this, we're talking about this journey that you're taking, but we're almost talking about it like it's like a truck that runs on its own. But obviously there's human beings involved. Like, what were some of the most important hires or the most critical people you guys had to bring on and win? Because I'm sure that made some big differences.
Yeah. Well, there weren't hires, I guess, but my co-founders.
Yeah.
I guess I got lucky. Right, but that was the first step and the most critical step. Finding
that worked for you guys.
Yeah,
sometimes it doesn't work, but for you,
sometimes
it worked.
If you can find, unless you're on your own, right? If you can find great co-founders, that makes all the difference, right? You can share.
What would you advise to look for in your co-founder?
Well, I think shared ambition, right? I think that's important. You should both be willing to put everything in, right? If
So that's almost like equal commitment plus shared ambition.
Yeah, because that's the first thing that's starting to rub if it's not there. Yeah. Right? If somebody feels they have to run faster than the other, then that creates tension. Ideally, if there's some kind of complementary skill set, right, that would be important. Complete trust, right? Of course, respect, right? I mean, basic stuff. But if you can find it, and you feel as a team, you're truly a team. I mean, there's nothing. I wouldn't do it any other way, right? And frankly, it's the only. Your co-founders are the only people you can share everything with, because they're the only one in the same situation. Everybody else is on your payroll, so by definition, you can't. And they may not lie up or lie awake as much as your co-founder will.
Y Combinator agrees with you. They actually started a co-founder matching service because they don't want anybody to go as a lone entrepreneur anymore. They want all of their companies. They'd run the stats, and their most successful companies, 60% or 70%, all came with more than one co-founder. So now they match co-founders to the ones they like.
And then so next step when you started hiring.
Yeah, so your co-founders, right? That's the core. And then my philosophy to hiring, or at least in the early days, was it's not about individuals per se, right? My focus has always been, at least for initially the first 10, then the first 30, 50, maybe the first 100. I was never focused on finding that, key hire. I was focused on creating a tribe, right? A family, a culture, right? Because that's ultimately what you're building, right? And as a company, the first thing you create is a culture and a way of working and a team. And if you want people to come to work not because they have a job, but because they are part of this mission, right? And you want them to work as hard as possible, right? That's what matters. So that's been the initial focus, and that meant that we would just look for talent anywhere, right? We weren't looking for skill sets. We were looking for mindset and kind of a shared interest in what we're building, which was this crazy product, crazy company. That
they had to believe in the cause. That's basically what you're saying, right? Because you're on a mission here. You've got a cause to, as you said, democratize app development for the world, bring it to the power to the people type stuff. Here.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you're a young entrepreneur with very little experience in leading organizations and stuff. I would imagine that you would also want to hire some of that experience. And how did you go about? Did you do that, or was the tribe more important?
Well, the tribe in the early days, because we weren't scaling out, right? We're growing to maybe, I think we probably grew to 40, 50 people or so initially before we felt, hey, now it would be nice to have somebody that's actually done this before.
You want some adult supervision at some point.
And so the first few tries failed completely. We didn't know what to look for. Anybody.
So you made hires that you had to.
Yeah. We hired like a general manager, and I don't know what titles we gave out, but people that at least 20 years more experience than we did, and that's hard, right? It's hard because one, it's hard to find people, right? In general, number one, but two, it's very hard to translate experience from one situation to the next. So if you're hiring for experience as opposed to mindset, skill set, or something like that,
learning capacity.
Yeah, all you get is somebody that's gonna project what they knew worked in their past to your situation, right? Which rarely works in my experience. So when we started to scale out, especially after we started raise serious capital, we had to look for senior people that knew how to manage big teams and had network and could attract other talent. This was the hardest part because one, how do you find these people? How do you sell them on your story? Right? Yeah. It's just as hard as selling investors or customers. If you want to have the best talent, if you're early, and then the impact of making a mishire is much greater, right? And you rarely know until you're 6-12 months in, right? So
you burn a year on the wrong person.
Exactly, yeah.
And your business model at this time is still like give it away for free, get paid on the app side, or you're starting to evolve towards the sales model?
To this day, still. Yeah.
I cycle back a bit. Because you said, we were at 40 and we then started thinking about, well, you have to get in some people that actually have done this before. You as a leader of your organization, there must have been some self-realization about what your role was and what you could add to the company. And so you're looking to hire people with other skill sets. So what were you then, after you had these few mishires, what do you discover about your role in relationship to these hires that you hoped that would bring in new qualities to the company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what I learned is that there's a big difference between being a leader and being a manager, right? And being a leader doesn't really require a lot of experience, right? This is really about there's a lot to leadership, I guess. We can talk about that forever. But I felt confident that I knew where we wanted to go, that I knew what kind of talent we needed and what kind of company we wanted to build, right? In fact, that goes back to, again, the first day, or even before that, when the first time I remember when I got together with my two co-founders about this idea of starting this company. And I remember the first meeting, we spent hours not talking about the product or the market or, the growth or all the money we needed or whatever. We were talking about the type of company we wanted to build, which was about two things. One, we wanted to build technology that would help our customers innovate and, be technology companies. That was kind of the business side. But the other piece was we wanted to build a great company that's able to attract, retain, develop. I think we wrote it down as the brightest minds in the industry. And the reason we said that, this was probably the biggest visionary moment we had in our past 15 years, is that one, talent is the key to success. So if we're able to do that, we can conquer any challenge, number one. But number two is what we enjoy most. So we said if we're going to spend the next 10 years or 20 years, whatever, of our lives building this company 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we better enjoy it.
So a good company literally means having,
exactly,
good company.
Exactly right. And so this purely, I mean, our personal motivation, building something great and being around people that are
no asshole policy.
But then you also touch on what's kind of one of the big red flags for investors, in a sense. Maybe you got to be careful that the culture doesn't become so precious that you don't want to change it, right? I mean, it has to grow, and you can't hold on to the same culture you had when you had 20 people. Same ideas maybe, but the same culture. Because culture actually, as much as it can give you a boost, it can quite handcuff you if you're not careful.
Absolutely. And that's why... But I fully agree with you. And to me, culture is a very dynamic, living thing. It changes every day. With every person you bring on board, the culture changes and hopefully gets better and richer. But there are a few fundamental principles that I think define your culture. It's how you behave and what you allow and what you don't allow. But for years, I resisted writing it down. I didn't even know exactly what our principles were. It was just how we acted and what we felt was important. So only when we started to really scale out internationally, I think we had like 5 offices around the world, and we had a senior HR leader on board, and she said, "Hey, we need to define this thing, right? This thing you call the Mendix Blue culture." I said, "No, everybody knows it. We're not going to write this down and put it on the wall."
Once we write it down, it makes it too corporate.
It's more than that. It's more than a few words on the wall. And this was what I would say. But I was wrong, because the moment you start allowing other people to hire and fire, right, you need to tell them what is important, right? Yeah. What you accept and won't accept. So you have to, and I'm not saying let's write down every rule, right? I'm saying what are your core principles? What are your core values that you live by and that you celebrate, right? And so we did that. And actually, we made this a group process. So we involved the whole company. They're on our website. You can check them out. But this became our culture. And the good thing is that this is a living thing. It's not a static thing. Everybody translates them in their own way. That's why it works, right? It's something you can own.
And looking back, were there things that you want to warn other founders for and saying, well, this was a really stupid thing we did, and you can, avoid this from happening?
Well, I'm always careful advising others because
you don't have to advise. Just say what your experience was. They can draw their own conclusions.
Yeah. Well, the reason I say that is because every mistake we made got us to where we are, right? And so I think making mistakes is essential, even big ones, as long as you learn and you're correct. So I would say don't avoid mistakes, right? Make them. Just look for data and proof points about what's working, and that's why you said egoless or no ego culture is so important, because egos can kill you, right? They prevent you from being honest with yourself sometimes. So, but yeah, we made plenty of mistakes.
Well, in the spirit of an ego-free zone, I just want to pick on that a little bit. I mean, there must have been things along the way, like, we gave out too many preferences, or we gave out voting rights, or you talked about like the mishires and stuff like that. Like, give us some of the good dirt here that helps the other CEOs go, oh shit, I'm about to do that. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Dirt sells. Huh? It's good
That's
for
right.
a podcast
We need that.
as well. We need more
we
dirt.
Need that stuff.
We've been too complimentary.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long list, right? And I think we didn't actually make this mistake, but we got very close.
Nice.
And I think, and obviously every founder has their limitations, and you need to decide what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. But I've learned that your ability as a founder is much greater than what you may think or what people may tell you, right? So you may be forced to hire some big executive to take over some big part of your role because they've done this before or whatever. And I've never seen that work. And I've always, in hindsight, I was okay, well, if that's what you're looking for, if I can just try this, right, we'll get there. So this is maybe more personal, right? Every founder is different. So some founders may say, hey, I'm not that guy, right? I'm not that girl, and I need somebody to do this for me. But the industry, especially venture community, likes certain profiles, right? They like certain, ways of doing things, and
track records, operational skills,
exactly.
stuff like that.
And if it's not your thing, don't try to be someone else, right? So that's what I learned. At least.
You almost made that mistake, but you didn't.
Yeah.
So you were on the edge of making a choice, I guess.
Yeah, because I had to reinvent myself probably 5 times, right? In a 10-year
Derek
period.
Version 5.
Yeah, for sure. And
I think it's time for some rapid fire
I think
questions.
we should just hit you with a couple of our rapid fire questions. This is the ones where you don't really need to spend too much time answering or thinking about them. The idea is to go pretty quick. Let me just throw one or two. Look, is there anybody alive or dead that you would like to take advice from? If you could talk to them, you'd like to ask them for advice.
Yeah, no, I've never really thought about that. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier, right? I think advice is great, but I've never really looked for advisors. I mean, you get advice from all sides.
Didn't have mentors, didn't have people you trusted, just went to with hard questions?
I think the best mentors, or I would say advisors, are people in the field, people in the arena, right? People on the sidelines. It's easy, right, to get an opinion. I never really put much stake into that. It's other founders are the best source of feedback for me.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, and doing it. I think that's,
You talked about, Derek V5. So what's the biggest difference between when you began to think of yourself as an entrepreneur and then you had to think of yourself as a CEO? What's the gap between those two, or what's the difference?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest difference is obviously managing a big organization, right? I think we're now 1,500 people or so. I mean, that's if you think about how I spend my time today, it's not how I used to do that 10 years ago. I look back to those days sometimes, long back to those days, right? I would say but still being the entrepreneur, right? Being able to create something out of nothing, from the 0 to 1, that to me is still important today. That ever goes away or should go away. So it's a combination. It's not a transition. I think it's being both.
This evolution that you have to go through. How about momentum versus precision? I mean, you're trying to put a company out there. You're taking it over another country. And we haven't gone into the question of the choice to sell yet. So because we should end on the note we started with. But this momentum versus precision. There's a lot of different philosophies on this. Do you have one?
That's the easy one. Momentum.
Yeah.
All day. Yeah. You don't have time for perfection or precision. No, it's all about momentum because that's how you learn, right? Get it out there early.
Okay. So let's round out where we started.
Yeah.
Right? So we kicked you off with this biggest decision you had to make, and you made it. So why? Why did you guys decide that was the right thing for you and for others who think about it? Like, what's I know you don't want to give advice, so just share your own experience.
Yeah. Well, we were in this really strange moment in our journey where we started to see a lot of competition. So we expected the market to change quite a bit. We were having a lot of momentum. And we're thinking, okay, what's the next stage? And we were considering an IPO. We were considering another round of private equity, venture capital. So those were the two options, right? Because we felt we had to, accelerate even further. And then we got a call from Siemens, and who wanted to buy the company, and actually put an offer in front of us. And I convinced my board and my co-founders to decline it, which had nothing to do with Siemens. It was just the fact that I wasn't ready to sell, and my co-founders weren't ready to sell. And but it turned out Siemens hadn't told us the full story. So when we said no, they said, okay, let's come to Munich, spend a few days with us, and we'll explain to you what we have in mind. And that's where they laid out their vision for where Siemens is going, but also two things that we didn't realize before. They said, one, we love what you're doing as a platform. We want to become a digital leader, and we believe you guys can be the foundation for that. But for that to work, we want you guys to continue to do what you do, like you have. So you get, complete freedom to continue to grow your business just like you have been, which is great. That was kind of our IPO scenario. But number two, we're going to make sure we get the leverage from the rest of our, install base, our ecosystem.
Which is pretty big for Siemens.
Which is gigantic. I mean, they're the number one industrial company in the world. I said, okay, well, that's something that we'll never get being a private company. So we said, let's actually the best of both worlds. So we realized it's the best for our company, for our customers, our shareholders, our investors. We said, okay, we got really excited. So we said yes.
Indeed, you did.
Yeah.
Any final words of advice? There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there. There's a lot of people in this ecosystem trying to break through.
He's not giving advice, Joe.
Any words of encouragement that you might want to share, or discouragement? It's up to you. Look, man, they're listening. They want to know, like, oh, okay, you kind of made it. So, how should I think about this?
I mean, if you're a startup founder in the Netherlands, first of all, I think you're lucky because there's so much opportunity, so much talent, capital, great customers to learn from. But as soon as you're ready, I would say the world is your opportunity, right? So think big, I would say.
Think big and go fast.
Think big and go fast.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's just as an observation. I think it's you cannot advise other entrepreneurs because nobody would be this modest and ego-free and still think big and do what you have done. It's quite remarkable. We tried to test you a bit on that ego side and your eagerness as well. And I don't think we see that many entrepreneurs that are have achieved what you've achieved and still remain so modest. And I don't think we advise our entrepreneurs to be that modest. Actually, we
may at times be giving the opposite story to compensate for some humility that seems to be built into the culture.
Especially when we compare to some of the US entrepreneurs, where selling yourself and making yourself bigger, also for good reasons, can actually be helpful. So thank you very much for this conversation.
Absolutely.
And we will keep following you and all the great stuff that still is to come. And also thank you very much for all you're doing for the Dutch ecosystem and for other entrepreneurs. It's very valuable, and I hope that many will follow your not your advice but your example.
Yeah,
example.
Well, thank you, and it was a pleasure doing this, and I love being, if it's helpful, being an inspiration to these other founders, and that's why I said I don't advise, but I'm happy to share our mistakes, and if people learn from that or are inspired by that, then I'm happy.
Perfect.
We do this.
Derek, thanks
Thank you. Thank you for listening to The Scale Lab, a podcast brought to you by TechLeap. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please share it on your network via social media and give us your feedback. See you on the next episode.